everybody? Welcome into another episode of Till Mets Do Us Part, where we are live on YouTube, live on Twitter and X, just like we are each and every single Wednesday at 5:30 Eastern Standard Time, or thereabouts. I guess 5:33, 5:34 here this afternoon. That is how it goes sometimes. Yes, I hope that you are ready for this one. Like CP says, we appreciate that. Chris Ferraro, always on top of this. Like the video. Yes, please go ahead and do that. Of course, your questions, your comments, your concerns, even if you're just reminding us to remind people to like the video, all of that stuff comes in real time. We can see it. We can react to it. And you know what? This time of year, it is the perfect time for your live comments because things quiet down a little bit. I mean, there's still plenty of work to be done in the offseason, still some big names that haven't been signed, some linked to the Mets, some not. But, you know, this is a great time for your voices to really be heard and the additions that all of you who watch live bring to the conversation to really be full-fledged members, more so than sometimes when we do interviews and things like that, like we did last week, which, by the way, if you haven't watched it yet, you can go back and check out our interview last week with the one and only Terry Collins. It's on our YouTube channel, which a lot of you are watching right now. And if you missed that, you can also listen to it wherever you get your podcast, courtesy of the Premier Podcast Network. Now that that's all out of the way, John Sapanaro out in Los Angeles, California, which means my co-host Matt Ibby Ibanez holding it down back in New Jersey. Ibby, how you doing, man?
I'm doing pretty good, John. It is freezing here in Jersey. Snow's been wild. Ice everywhere. It was tough this morning. Snow day yesterday. Got to play out in the snow with the girls, which was fun. But it's freezing, man. Waking up this morning, 15 degrees, car frozen. Couldn't open my doors. Couldn't open the trunk. I know you were in San Antonio and you had to deal with like 20-degree weather. It's cold, man, which kind of brings you down a little bit because it's freezing. You don't want to go outside. That seasonal like depression because it's January, nothing's going on. But other than that, I'm doing well. It's Wednesday. The red light's on. Always pumped up to talk Mets. We got 25 in the room. I'm sure that's going to climb as we go throughout the entire episode. But I'm excited. There are some talking points. Believe it or not, there are some talking points. And yes, I saw in the comments, I am rocking the polar bear hat because, like I said, it's freezing. It's been a cold stove for the most part, but there are still some good things that we're going to talk about in today's episode. And I'm pumped up as always. So let's get to it.
Yeah, there's the comment right there from Jeff Cohen. And, if some of you are like me and Ibby of a certain age, you know that the great terminology that I love to use this time of year is that it's brick outside. Brick is one of my favorite New York, New Jersey terms for when it's cold out. Oh, man. Look, shout out to Douglas Barnes, who must be freezing up there in Maine. Oh, my goodness. That is brutal. Look, I don't deal with it that much living out here in Southern California. But, I do travel for work and I do travel to cold places this time of year. San Antonio was absolutely brutal. And the weather was schizophrenic because when I landed on Thursday afternoon at 3 p.m., it was 75 degrees. It got up to about 78 degrees. And then when I left on Monday morning, at 4:30 in the morning, because my flight was at 6, it was 19 degrees. And that temperature swing over a 4-day period was stupid. That's not fair. That's not normal. That's not how life should work. That shouldn't be allowed. I don't know who causes that. I don't know who we have to write to, but that is nonsense. Last year when I was in San Antonio, the weather was like what you would expect in Texas in the winter. It was like 55, no higher than that, and like 40, no lower than that, which is what you would think. But you know what? It was brutal going from, there was no way to prepare. There was no way to pack for 75 to 20. No. That was just something that I could not, I couldn't, especially because this polar vortex that hits Texas sometimes wasn't due to hit that part of Texas till like Tuesday or Wednesday, but it wound up blowing in on like Sunday night and being there on Monday. So like I didn't have the necessary stuff because I was like, well, I'm not going to be here on Tuesday or Wednesday. I'm getting out of Dodge. I'll be good. And I was not good. Fortunately, where I was working was a domed stadium. So I was in the legendary, the world famous, the now a bit old and dated, but still very cool to work at Alamo Dome. And so it doesn't really matter how cold it is outside. Yeah. You are protected from the elements a bit. But that said, Ibby, yes, there was plenty of stuff to talk about with our New York Mets. And Patty really nailing it, though. Texas has crazy weather. Texas sometimes super hot, sometimes it snows, sometimes Ted Cruz goes to Cancun and leaves the rest of the state just, freezing to death with no power, whatever. Anyway, let's talk about the Mets. The first thing I want to talk about is a little bit of old news, admittedly,
Sure.
but we had Terry Collins on last week, and a lot of you are super complimentary of that. Robert saying the interview was epic.
Thank you, Robert.
Awesome interview. We had Terry Collins on last week. We couldn't get to what the Mets did last week, which was the signings or the official signings of Manaea and Bader. We didn't really comment on that. So I know it's a little bit of old news with regards to, some of our fans and the news cycle. But Ibby, let's touch on it real quick. So, thoughts on both of those guys?
I mean, I know everyone had some reservations when it came to the Bader signing, mainly because everyone's like, well, you sign a center fielder. What happens with Nimmo, this and that? I mean, I had mentioned 2 episodes ago that when we were talking with Timothy Ryder about what way this team might go, and I had mentioned that I thought that, more than likely when we were talking DH, and we'll talk more about DHs at one point in this episode, but when we were talking DH, I was saying how the team was probably likely going to go the route of getting an outfielder that can play defense as opposed to focusing on an outfielder for the DH spot. And they ended up going with someone that being the best defender in center field over the last 5-6 years. Health pending, of course, in Harrison Bader. I have no problem with that signing. I think it makes sense. I like the idea of, playing Nimmo in center, then shifting him over to left, keeping him healthy. It's all about managing time and making sure that your good players are staying on the field. We've talked about that in length when it comes to signing someone like a Justin Turner. Same thing applies with someone like Nimmo, who's had his fair share of run-ins with his health. So making sure he's okay. And the fact that he's added some power to his game, I think it does profile well for left field. So I'm fine with the Bader signing. I like adding the defense, and that continues the point of what David Stearns has said this entire offseason, which has been run prevention. So it makes sense. As for Manaea, when we talked about him a couple weeks ago and the likes of him and Hyun-Jin Ryu, I said I would choose velocity over the soft tossing lefty, and they ended up going with Manaea. 2 years, 1 year opt out, basically.
Hey, hang on.
With what?
Jim Bowden thinks that Sean Manaea is a soft tossing lefty.
Oh, the fact that
that's what he said. That's what he said on Foul Territory, because there's a guy who's fucking locked in.
You know what? I don't want to talk about that or the dead rodent that he has on his head. I don't want to talk about that either. But the point is, look, Manaea, I said it the last handful of episodes when we were talking free agency and stuff. I thought Manaea would be a lot better when he was, his stint in San Francisco, pitching factory. Didn't really equate to what I thought it would be. Second half, he was very strong. When you look at everything in a vacuum, the numbers were pretty solid. But adding the sweeper, working a drive line, adding the velocity, all those things encompassed into one, I think it makes sense. And David Stearns talked about that in his interview with, as I think CP said it in the chat, the squirrely looking Andy Martino. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But I like Manaea.
Everything about him is just so sad. Honestly, when I look at him, I just can't help but feel like, ugh.
Well, the problem with him is, again, I don't mean to get off topic, but he always just looks so disheveled with his hair. It's like to the side, his shirt's so
sorry. I know I'm derailing. I know I'm derailing your whole great point here, and I'm so sorry to do it first with the Bowden stuff, now with the Martino stuff. But yes, and some people defended him. I know I take a lot of pot shots at Andy Martino and a lot of people on WFAN. Shout out Spike Eskin, by the way, running for a job as soon as you get the opportunity to, you fucking clown. Anyway, no, but I know I give these guys a lot of flack, but with respect, on a smaller scale or a different scale or however you want to quantify it, I work in this industry. I have appearance clauses in my contract. I have to be on television sometimes. I have to be in the public eye every weekend in front of 40,000 people, sometimes 60,000 people. Iron your fucking shirt. Iron your shirt and put a little bit of product in your hair. It doesn't take much to wear clothes that fit you. Sal Licata the other day is on baseball night in New York with glasses on that the arms don't even reach his ear. I don't know how big his head is, but man, get him some bigger glasses, dude. Come on. That's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. It doesn't take any. John Heyman does interviews on podcasts like this. Ibby, you're operating out of your house. I think you're in your basement. I don't want to blow the reveal here. You're in your basement. You got a mesh backdrop. Okay. I live, okay. Like, I'm not glamorous. I live in a fucking studio apartment. Okay. It's a nice studio apartment, but it's a studio apartment. If you look at my backdrop, you would never know. I got a desk. I got a boom mic. I am ready to go. This guy, Jon Heyman, is like, it looks like he is coming to you live from a fucking seance. I don't know what this dude is doing. Jon Heyman looks like he's doing interviews from beyond the grave. Like, what the fuck, dude? Comb your hair, you fucking tool bag. What are you doing? I'm sorry. I'm feeling frisky today. Anyway, go back to your points.
I will finish my point in a moment. I do want to just shout out. I don't know if it was. I'm trying to think of who said. Oh, I think it was Jazz Chisholme on Twitter when John was ripping into Martino. His comment cracked me up, where he said that his favorite part of your rant was questioning his posture, which I thought was very funny as well. But to finish my point on Sean Manaea, the added velocity, I'm about it. I think I like the upside. I like playing the upside card when it comes to signings like this, when there's more of a ceiling as opposed to settling for the floor on someone. I think a player like Ryu would have been settling for that floor type of, oh, he can be this and it can get you here. But it's like, I like the ceiling aspect of a Manaea, where if he shows out, it's like, okay, you got something here that can really slot in nicely, maybe as a back end 3-4 type. But if it doesn't, and I know people were like, oh my God, you signed this guy, he's been up and down. It's like, okay, say worst case scenario, he bottoms out and it doesn't work and he opts into his deal to stay for 2 years. Well, now you got a solid swing guy. Like, no matter what, like, I don't think that there is a problem with the deal being 2 years, 1 year for the opt that he's banking on himself. If he shows out, he can opt out, get more money, go elsewhere, and then you can say, okay, thank you for the 1 year. Or he stays and you got a solid swingman. Like, either way, it's a win-win in my opinion. So I'm about it. I like both signings. And I know people aren't the biggest of fans of them because it's not of the sexier nature in terms of name. But I think that they both fit what David Stearns has been trying to accomplish this offseason.
Look, I agree. You said a lot of great stuff there. I'm going to jump into the comments, some funny stuff here first, and then I'll give my opinion. Patty in NYC saying, John is a fashionista. Thank you. I appreciate that. And then talking about Martino. Unfortunately, he gets interviews looking like a high school sophomore. Keith Blacknick, Keith Media Goon saying, I live in an apartment and I have uplighting, which is such a hilarious thing to say, especially, which is true, by the way. Keith's setup is terrific, but it just goes to show you that, like, you can make this stuff work with like not a lot of money. You just have to have like a little bit of want to and effort to make it look like you don't, as Chris puts it, Jon Heyman looks like he's from The Walking Dead. And I agree. That's so fantastic. Shout out to Carlos Ramos, by the way. I forgot, he said earlier, it's 23 this morning in Houston. I don't know what to tell you. And then following it up by saying F Ted Cruz, by the way. But Carlos, I forgot. I know you've mentioned it before. I forgot that you're in Houston, and I'm actually going to be in Houston in a couple of weeks, so we should link up. I'm going to be in Houston. That said, Ibby, look, I agree with you on all fronts when it comes to these players. I'll take Bader first because I think he's the simpler one. Yeah. We've talked about it on the show. Carson has mentioned it in the comments, and when we do collabs with his show, you've mentioned it. I've said it. There is no such thing as a bad one-year deal. That's what Harrison Bader is. It's a 1-year deal. I know that he has not produced offensively the way he originally profiled when he came up with St. Louis, but I think he has a bigger ceiling there than he has shown if he can stay healthy. Now, that's a huge if, but, facts are facts. And I think he's got some power. I think he's got some upside that he hasn't yet shown as an offensive player. His skill set on defense is exactly what you described. I mean, by some metrics over the last 5 years, he is the best defensive center fielder in baseball when he plays.
By a large margin.
By a large margin. Yeah. And I say by some metrics because, you can look at others and you give, whether you're looking at defensive runs saved, UZR, whatever it might be, there's a lot of different ways that you can measure this. But also, when you look at defensive metrics, they're important, but they are non-exact in terms of being a non-exact science. When you look at it, he just passes the eye test, right? Sometimes you see somebody out there and you're like, man, their ratings are great, but I don't know. When I watch them every day, I'm not sold that they're as good as some stuff says. But with Harrison Bader, when you watch him with your eyes, you're like, he's fucking great in center field on defense. So I like the idea of bringing him on board. I was a little surprised to see the outright admission that he's going to play a lot in center field. I thought they would maybe let that happen, let it play out, let him be productive as a hitter and let him stay healthy and then maybe work his way into where he's playing a good amount. But I also don't mind them kind of writing him into center field a good portion of the time. Look, I've said on this show a million times, I was wrong about Brandon Nimmo. When Brandon Nimmo first came up, I thought Brandon Nimmo would be a very good fourth outfielder on a team. Super serviceable in all three spots and, great off the bench. He had a lot of tools in terms of, obviously he's always had that eye tool and that base on balls tool. And I was like, okay, that's where he's going to peak. Well, he made himself into a terrific center fielder. And he made himself into a wonderful offensive player that is a legitimate leadoff hitter that needs to play every day, that got the contract that he deserved in free agency. Probably a little bit of an overpay, but you know what? You pay your guys to keep them, and Steve Cohen has so much money, I don't care about the dollars. So I was wrong on Nimmo years ago. But it doesn't change the fact that I think Nimmo is best served as a left fielder. He doesn't have a terrific arm. He's managed to stay very healthy over the last couple of years playing center field, but I don't think that trend's going to continue as he gets older. So I think we put him in left field a bulk of the time, and then you can always slot him back into center field if Bader gets hurt, if Bader is unproductive, if you can do a lot of different things with Brandon Nimmo where you're not locked in at one position. So I like that. And for that, the Bader move makes enough sense. I also think it's the identical deal that Kiermaier got, so it's kind of the running rate for these players. With Manaea, I said it 2 weeks ago on this show. Carson basically in the comments talked me into him. It's not that I wasn't aware of what he was doing, but it wasn't at the forefront of my mind. I knew about the uptick in velocity. I knew about adding the sweeper. I knew that he was closing out the season very strong. I knew that he was finding this second gear, but he just wasn't at the forefront of my mind. I don't know why. I kind of forgot he was a free agent for a little while. Like there was a lot to him that I was distracted by Yamamoto. Like I just didn't have Manaea on my radar. But as we talked about him 2 weeks ago, and then Carson brought up some of the things, I was very quickly reminded of a lot of that stuff that I just mentioned. And with that, I think the 2-year deal or the potential 2-year deal with regards to Sean Manaea is kind of like it's a different version, but it's kind of like what we've been talking about Brandon Woodruff. Now, the obvious thing is that you're going to get, Manaea this season, whereas Woodruff would just be sitting on the bench, and rehabbing from his injury. But I like the fact that you go get a guy and you potentially have him for 2 seasons. So you're not just taking this shot in the dark, this flyer, you're allowing yourself to have a guy potentially for the next 2 seasons when you're looking to contend and grow, because sometimes we notice the pitfalls, and then I'll let you comment because I know I'm talking a lot here, but we notice the pitfalls of when you have to replace a lot of players all at once. Yes. It's difficult. Look, the Mets just did it from 22 into 23. Part of the reason, now you could argue again, and we've talked about it a million ways over, but you can argue the fact that the Mets didn't have to go out and get Verlander, and they didn't have to go out and get this guy and that guy and this guy and that guy. But the fact of the matter was the Mets are a 101-win team that had like 10 free agents in their starting, from their starting staff to their bullpen to their starting players on the field, their position players. So you wind up in these situations where when you have to replace so many spots in one offseason, it's not ideal. So you have Manaea now for 2 years potentially, and you have him in either a swing role or, a couple different options and ways you can use him. And I think it makes a ton of sense. I don't have a problem with either one of these deals. I also understand, look, Ibby, let's call it what it is. Neither deal is sexy.
No.
Neither deal is going to be something that we should all be dancing in the streets about.
No.
But that doesn't mean that they're bad. And you know what? They all speak to, like you said, Stearns' strategy thus far. And they all speak to what he said in his public comments. He's not here to win off seasons. He's here to win baseball games. And I think Harrison Bader and Sean Manaea put this Mets team closer to winning more baseball games than not having them does. And I think that's all you can say.
Absolutely. And like I said, it's filling those holes that are really have really showed in this team. And like you said, it's very difficult to go into multiple off seasons, year after year, trying to rebuild everything. And that's going to lead into our next conversation about what Stearns said and the farm system and development and things of that nature, because it's like you can't go into every offseason looking to rework your entire staff or an entire bullpen. That's not how good teams operate. That's not how good teams win. Both these signings are fine. They are what they are. I think they help a team win ball games. Do I think they're going to end up being, extremely plus players in terms of WAR and things of that nature? Probably not. Not where it's going to be. Like, we're not sitting here saying that, Harrison Bader is going to be like a 4 WAR player. We're not saying that. Like, we think he's going to fill in fine. We're excited to talk about the likes of Drew Gilbert and what he might bring to the outfield. Obviously, a 1 year doesn't really hinder anybody in terms of playing time if he doesn't do well, and then Gilbert's tearing it up in AAA, and he comes up, and now he can slot himself in, whether it's in center or a corner, whatever they see fit. There's nothing wrong with any of this. It makes sense, and like we said, it fits the mold of what Stearns has been saying this entire time of what he wants to accomplish this offseason.
Yeah, let's jump into the comments. A lot of good stuff here, and people basically all agreeing. I don't think anybody has like a massive dissenting vote, because again, when something is not sexy and splashy, as neither one of these moves are, I think a rational baseball fan can't be mad at them either, right? I just said like they're not the kind of moves that are going to get you dancing in the street, but it's because they're not polarizing. They're just smart moves that smart organizations make to fill out a roster as you're trying to be competitive, trying to, catch lightning in a bottle maybe with some of these players. So yeah, they're not going to get you super excited, but I don't think anybody should be bashing these moves either, because they're not the guy. You can't bash a 1 year, $10 million deal for an outfielder that may be the best center fielder in baseball when he plays from a defensive standpoint. Obviously not the best overall center fielder in baseball. But that said, Carson saying center field for Nimmo has nothing to do with ability, more the fact that he is entering his 30s and still has a patented neck heart issues. So not something I want to keep pushing as time goes on with a $162 million player. I agree there. Carlos saying, I don't mind Nimmo out of center field. He's best suited for left field. Maybe that allows him to use his speed on the bases more as well, which is another, another additional way to look at
the only thing I'll say there is I think we've all been waiting for Nimmo to steal more. I don't think it's going to happen. Like, I mean, I get the point. I do. And I want him to be like a 10 to 15 type of steal player. I just don't think we're going to get it that often.
Yeah, that's entirely fair as well. Carson also saying, I like the Bader. I'd love the Bader move, if Marte wasn't such a massive hellbent through the next 2 years. I don't hate it, though. Basically saying if they weren't completely tied to Marte the way that they are. Although Marte, that error last night, terrible error in right field notwithstanding, has looked really good offensively. He looks healthy. So I do love that. And Carson, again, really, he's on it with this Bader thing. The most I'm asking from Bader is a 7 to 750 OPS. Beat Canna with more pop. I think that's a really good comp.
I think that's fair. I think that's fair.
I think the Mets thought they were getting a different. I like Canna. Honestly.
Mark Canna. I like Mark Canna. Yeah.
He seems like a great dude, man. He really does. And, he was actually a decent Met. I just don't think he did what the Mets needed him to do. I think they thought they were getting a different kind of player, and he was not really that kind of player. So, if you're giving me the offense that Canna gave the Mets, but with more power, that's what the Mets wanted from Canna. The offensive output he gave, but with more power. So I think this team still needs something like that. And so I think that's another astute observation there. I do want to give credit to Jeff Cohen here. Shameless plug, former Met Kelly Stinnett on my podcast this Saturday, Baseball and BBQ.
Love it, Jeff.
Baseball and BBQ is a super good podcast, so check it out. And good for you for grabbing a former Met on that show.
Show him some love.
Absolutely. And then, Ibby, this is, you kind of mentioned him already, and this is twofold, and Carson getting a lot of love here, and I'll say why in a minute. But Chris saying, do you guys think this is a setup for Drew Gilbert being called up during the year. And Carson answering, basically saying the Bader signing proves their confidence in Gilbert, not to mention college teammates with Alonzo, time to win the power of friendship. So no, I do think based on what Stearns said in his interview with that sack of dirty laundry, Martino, this week, and what Carson is saying, I think that makes a lot of sense. Like, Gilbert is close. And I think signing a guy who can be a stopgap player can be really, really good if he is good, or can be a stopgap player that you're not locked into in Bader, I think does prove that they have a lot of faith in Drew Gilbert. I think Carson's spot on there.
Absolutely. And I really do think that, based off the thing that Stearns said in his interview, which we'll talk about in a moment more in depth, but just hitting on some of the stuff real quick, the fact that, he's open to the idea of young players getting time and allowing them to progress here, and understand that, it's not always going to end up being, sunshine and rainbows when it comes to young players getting time. Sometimes it takes time for them to really show out and succeed at this level. But he also said, this is New York. It's I understand this is New York, but it can happen in places like this as well if you want to win. In so few words, that's what he said. I do think Drew Gilbert is going to be up on this team at some point in 24. How early? I think it's really dependent on what Carson was saying before when it comes to Bader, what he provides, and really how great Gilbert is doing at AAA. But I really do think we are going to see him at some point, whether it's before or after the All-Star break. I don't know. I think a lot of things are gonna play into that, and obviously we don't like talking about injuries and things of that nature because we don't want anybody to get hurt. But I do think that we will be seeing him. I think he plays a role for this team, and I think his overall energy, I think, is going to be something that this team has been lacking for a long time. I think he's going to bring that to the table, and it's going to really allow this team to start to develop a new identity, which I've been saying for the longest time. This team is lacking a true identity, and I think the youth of this team that's going to get sprinkled in this year and moving forward is going to finally help provide an identity that we've been lacking for the longest time.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Grab this comment here from Armand saying, does Drew Gilbert get called up if the Mets are in a playoff race during the second half of the season? I mean, that's a tough question to answer, Armand, because a lot really plays into that, right? You're asking, it's a good question, but you're asking a lot all at once. The Mets have to be in said playoff race first, right, Ibby? Then the other part of it is, what are the other guys doing, and where are the injuries at? Look, and what is Gilbert doing? Gilbert might be up sooner than that, right? Gilbert may, out of necessity, he might find himself on this team kind of the way Francisco Alvarez found his way on this team. Nobody wanted, everybody said he wasn't ready yet. He wasn't ready yet. Next thing you know, the Mets have their top two catchers go on the IL. Well, you got to call up Alvarez. Where else are you going to go? And so the Mets could be in a similar situation there. Also, if Gilbert's not doing great and they have a need, well, he probably won't be brought up. But in a perfect storm scenario, or a near perfect storm, maybe, if they're in a playoff race and he is hitting in AAA and Bader is hurt or Bader is not hitting, then yes, I think the Mets do call him up if they're in a playoff race to try to inject some life into the offense. But I also think that there's a chance he's up sooner. I also think there's a chance that, listen, again, Bader, I stand by this. I don't know what the upside is, but if Bader is healthy, I think Bader provides more upside than people are thinking. I think Bader is a good player. Even on the offensive side of the ball, I think there is growth there. And I think a lot of that growth has been stumped by the fact that he hasn't played consistently enough because of injury. So, am I right? Am I wrong? I don't know, but I think there's something there. So I think that, this is a good question, but I think it's too multifaceted to just say yes or no, if that makes sense.
No, I get what you're saying. And I just think that, if you want to just like parlay this into the Stearns interview and the things that he said, I really think the more and more that I listened to it a couple of times, and I hear him speak, and obviously I think he has a plan. Obviously he has a plan, but he has a vision in place of really getting an understanding of what he has, which is why I don't think we're going to see that much outside of markets crashing down which we'll talk about when it comes to the DH, probably second half of the show. But when it comes to, what this, I'm trying to think where I was going. I lost my spot. Oh, okay. But all right. When it comes to, damn, I lost my spot. Pick it up.
You know what? Sometimes that happens.
I lost
man. You lose your train of thought.
I lost my train of thought.
I do want to bring up this comment. I do want to bring up this comment from Charlie. I just love the idea that we're talking about the Mets and playoff race in the same sentence because look, I do think that it's possible. I think the Mets. This is why I personally take umbrage with the concept that a lot of people have put out on Mets Twitter that the Mets are punting. The Mets are not acting as a team that is punting. If the Mets were punting, and I know that people are going to say that this is a semantics argument and people have different definitions of the word, there are some definitions that need to be a bit more objective and a little less tied to one's opinion. And I think punting is one of those things. When you are punting, you are giving up. The Mets are not giving up. If the Mets were punting, Ibby, the Mets would be trading some pieces off of their roster that other teams would want. Now, look, the Mets are not going to trade Lindor. They couldn't if they wanted to because only 2 other teams basically can afford or need that contract. The Mets are not going to trade Senga because they wouldn't have anybody to headline the rotation regardless. But if the Mets were punting, they probably would, regardless of their plans for 25 and 26 and beyond, they probably would have traded Pete Alonso, which I think now is a foregone conclusion they will not do, regardless of whether or not they extend him or re-sign him. If the Mets were punting, they would trade Alonso. If the Mets were punting, they would probably trade Jeff McNeil and his very team-friendly contract. If the Mets were punting, they might even consider trading Brandon Nimmo. I know that seems crazy because they just signed him to a deal. But again, when you look at his deal is very affordable. So if the Mets were punting, Nimmo, McNeil, Alonso, some of these guys would not be on the team. The Mets probably would have traded Brooks Raley. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like there's giving up. And that to me is what punting is. It's the idea of giving up versus saying, look, we're going to compete at the end of the season. We're going to be in it for a wild card. If we're in it at the deadline, we're going to acquire some pieces. You really think this team with this owner, with this farm system, with this guy, David Stearns, running it, are not going to look to acquire pieces if the Mets are 10 games over 500 and in a playoff spot come the trade deadline? What have you been watching if you think that they wouldn't do that? And that's part of the reason why they got to let these young kids play is that they can get a little bit more of a valuation out of them, something that I've been saying for the last 2 years. I said it when they had J.D. Davis and Dom Smith, who were giving you nothing at DH 2 years ago. I said, call up Vientos now.
Yes.
Call him up because he is hitting 30 home runs in AAA. And the best case scenario is you call him up, it translates, and you don't need a DH. The worst case scenario, he comes up, he hits 175, which I think was the combined batting average of J.D. Davis and Dom Smith at that point, with like 2 home runs between them. And then you have to go out and you got to get a DH anyway. But at least then you have a little bit of certainty. So with the first half of this season, you can get a little certainty out of some of these players. And I think, anybody who thinks that they're not going to be, again, that they're not going to be competitive is wrong. You want to change. Now, here's where we could bring semantics back in.
Right.
What contention means, that's fine to say my definition might be different than somebody else's. But it is not semantics to say that they're going to be competitive. If they're not going to be competitive, then going back to what we talked about weeks and weeks and weeks ago, then you don't have faith in this roster, period. Then you don't have faith in Lindor. Then you don't have faith in Alonso and Nimmo and Diaz. Then you don't have faith in any of them. Because they have enough of a core here where they should be competitive.
Yes.
Agreed. And like Baseball Tone says, 86 wins. Firm believer of that. As is, he's saying. And I agree. I think they're going to be in that ballpark. And I think if they add a little bit more, Ibby, I think that they are for sure in the conversation for the wild card.
Absolutely. And shout out to Tone, obviously. Welcome into the chat. Good to see you here. Shout out to him and his Tone Deaf podcast. Give him a listen as well. When it comes to what I was saying before, I try to refine that point. I think that the influx of youth is what we're going to see this year. And I think that coupled with the players that we have, like you said, the team didn't really do well last year. It was very up and down. It was a big letdown based off of expectations. But there are still really good players on this team, win now players on this team. If you infuse that with youth and allow that youth to learn how to play the game together and they grow, and yes, there's going to be ups and downs. And that's what's going to happen. That's what again, retooling, repurposing gear, doing things on the go, however you want, whatever you want to call it. It doesn't matter. But the whole thing here is you're going to see these young players get integrated in more so than we've seen previously. And again, Mets fans were so angry that young players weren't getting integrated in. Well, now you have a president of baseball who's telling you that young players are going to be worked in. Young players are going to be given rope to obviously try and succeed and not be shut down the way that we had seen previously, where we'd see Vientos get an at-bat, play for a game or two, and then he's benched for the next week. And you're like, there's no, I don't care who you are. If you don't give someone consistent at-bats, they're not going to get better. So doing things along those lines is what we're going to see, a better idea of that this year. And I think that that's a good thing. So I'm all about allowing the youth coming out into play, and based off of the things that Stearns had said in that interview yesterday or 2 days ago, whatever it was, I really feel like he's going to allow these players an opportunity to really show out. And that's why I'm of the mindset that you're not going to see that much more action in terms of signings, because I think it stifles those players from getting said playing time. I do have a thought, which we'll get into eventually, in terms of the DH that might be a little bit against that thought that I just gave. But I think it's going to be very minimal in terms of the type of player that they might go after if the market continues to bottom out like it looks like it's doing, specifically for the DHs.
Yeah, you know what? Let's leave it right here, head into the break, because we do have to talk a lot about the DH position, but I don't want to keep going and keep going and keep going. So the conversation will kind of continue with now molded a little bit more in the second half towards the DH. And of course, we have other stuff to get to. If you are watching live and if you're watching for the first time, either way, if you're watching live, hit the thumbs up button and subscribe to the channel. It helps out. But if you are watching for the very first time ever, the break is just 20 seconds. We need it as part of our ad spot for the audio version of this show. We will be right back. It is John Sapanaro. It is Matt Ibby Ibanez. It is Till Mets Do Us Part. Yo, just like that, we are back with Till Mets Do Us Part, live on YouTube, live on Twitter and X, where your questions, your comments, your concerns, everything that you want to add to the conversation come in real time. We can see them. We can react to it. Not a lot of comments. I don't think any so far, Ibby, coming in from Twitter or X. That is fairly new here to StreamYard, so we usually get one or two a show. I'm hoping that people start to pick up on that trend. Our Twitter just went over 2,000 followers. We're approaching 2,100, which, is not a huge amount, but obviously for us growing, it is important to us. And hopefully more people, hopefully more people start to watch on there and realize that their comments come in. I think when we first started doing this live stream on Twitter, sometimes we would get comments and questions and stuff that come on there that we couldn't see because we don't have Twitter pulled up simultaneously. So it was hard to react, and that may have discouraged some people from putting their comments there. But, the more we kind of talk about it, the more we push it out, and the more we let people know, hey, if you're watching on Twitter, we can see them now. That is important. But anyway, if you can't do any of that, if you can't watch us live, it's all good. This broadcast lives forever as soon as we end the live on our YouTube channel, which is appropriately called Till Mets Do Us Part. If you subscribe and turn notifications on, you will never miss the opportunity to watch us go live. And of course, we understand that if you can't do any of that, if you can't watch it at all, well, don't worry. We are available as an audio podcast starting the morning after we do the live stream, which is usually Thursday morning, wherever it is you get your podcast. So you can listen to us in the car, on your way to school, on your way to work, while you're at the gym, all courtesy of the Premier Podcast Network. So, Ibby, look, we talked a lot about the potential for this DH position. I feel like I've been a little bit I feel like what I've been saying about DHs and where this team should go and who this team should sign has been a little bit out of both sides of my mouth, or could be construed that way.
Mm-hmm.
So let me just say this definitively.
Okay.
One, I am pro talent, young, athletic talent. So I am never going to fault my team or any other team for going with a younger, more athletic player. So that's the first thing. The second part of it is there is a difference between what I, John, would do if I was in charge of the Mets versus what I think they may do as a fan like you, like everybody else who's watching from a distance and then opining on their process. So I would sign a DH. It's not because I don't think that Vientos can be a DH. It's because I don't trust Vientos or Beatty or DJ Stewart or anybody who's on this roster to protect Pete Alonso, which I think is the second most important thing that they needed to do heading into this offense besides adding pitching. So when I say I'm all for letting the kids play, I'm all for letting young players play, but I think a DH is important. That's why. The other flip side of it is last year when we were watching He Who Shall Not Be Named, DH for us, I was quick to early in the season, April, May, say, okay, guys, this is a guy coming from a guy who said the year before we should have called up Vientos.
Right.
Well, we did call up Vientos eventually. He didn't get a ton of a fair shake, but he also didn't produce with the time that he did have. So I'm like, listen, let's sit here and let's see what Daniel Vogelback can do 6 weeks into the season. 6 weeks into the season is okay. Now, when you're, 20 weeks into the season, it's probably not okay anymore because the sample size is different. Because I'm also a firm believer of letting those young kids play if they earn it. Beatty in AAA last year, in spring training last year, earned it. But then he did nothing, was given a full opportunity to play third base. So I don't think you can fault me for sitting here saying, I'd like to see a third baseman, or at least somebody who could play third base who's not Joey Wendell. I think Joey Wendell's a bench player, right? But I'd like to see a guy. I was okay with going into the season with a battle between Mauricio, Beatty, Vientos, who I don't think is going to be in that mix at third base, but I was okay with a 3 young player battle at third base. I'm not okay with what I think is a rigged game for Brett Beatty to be the starting third baseman. Because I don't think that Mark Vientos is a major league third baseman. I barely think he's a major league first baseman. Now, I think he might be a major league hitter, but I don't think that he can play third. So without the presence of Ronnie Mauricio, whatever people think about his defense at third base, I think Beatty's going to win the job by default. And I don't believe that you should give somebody a job by default. He earned it heading into last season. He fumbled the bag heading into this season. So I don't care if that person, I know they're not going to get Matt Chapman, and they shouldn't. That's stupid. But I think they should bring in Justin Turner. I think they should bring in Gio Urshela. And that doesn't change my opinion about young people playing. Does that make sense? Is that clear up?
No, it makes sense, but I'm also got to tell you, careful with the Chapman talk because, Baseball Tones in the comments saying he's a huge Chapman guy, so he's gonna come after you.
I just don't think he aligns with their plans financially.
No, I agree. I agree with that.
Market, now listen, I'm sorry, I'm gonna let you jump in. If the market for Matt Chapman, you're talking about shrinking markets.
Mm-hmm.
If Matt Chapman, and I don't think it's going to happen to this level, but if Matt Chapman has to take a pillow contract for 1 year, fucking sign me up. Yeah. I will take Matt Chapman tomorrow on a 1-year deal for a high AAV, or a 2-year or a 3-year deal with an opt-out after 1 so he can sure. Give me him on that deal for sure. But if you're talking long-term deal, the likes of which that he was, projected to get, I don't think that aligns with what the Mets are thinking. So I don't think it's possible. But if his market shrinks, I said that about everybody, Ibby.
Right.
I said if his market shrinks, give me Blake Snell. If his market shrinks, I want Bellinger. If his market shrinks, I'll take Montgomery. I've said that about everybody because of who our owner is. Steve Cohen has so much money. Matt Chapman's not worth this much money, but if he just said to Chapman, listen, we'll give you $50 million for 1 year. He could. Right. It doesn't matter. It's play money to him. Now, that's too much money, but you know what I'm saying. No, if his AAV was going to be 25 and he's like, listen, we'll give you 35 for a 1 year deal, take it or leave it, sign it right now. You think he's going to say no? Who's going to say no to $35 million? And you get to be a free agent next year. So that's the point that I have Tone saying, John, don't let Ibby guilt you. It's okay. I'm on an island here. No, but I sincerely Tone. I appreciate your opinion on this because I don't think it's wrong. Right. And I'm just being fair with what I've said, which is if markets shrink, I'll take every free agent you want to bring in. I don't care.
And the point that I was going to make when it comes to DH that I was hinting at before is when I heard Stearns talk, I really don't like everyone's talking about Soler and the idea of him and everything. And when I heard Stearns talk, I just felt like I heard, and I think CP said it a lot earlier in the chat saying how he felt that Vientos is going to probably be the DH. That's kind of where I'm at the moment too, outstanding unless something crazy happens. But, I really think that they want to see what they have and they're going to let these guys play, especially how Vientos finished. I think that's what they're going to end up going for. Now, is that proper? It depends. Look, David Stearns and his crew know a lot more than we do as fans. But I look at it and I go, if I'm doing a DH that's going to be in-house, yes, I would choose Vientos. Are we going out of house in terms of DH? And this isn't just because I like Justin Turner or anything more so than JD Martinez or Jorge Soler. It's more so from the fit standpoint of keeping a guy fresh, working in others, having platoon situations, things of that nature, where I could see a 1 year Turner make a lot more sense as opposed to him giving 2 or 3 years to a Jorge Soler, 2 years to JD Martinez. I think Turner fits in terms of what they're still trying to accomplish. Veteran leader, provides offense. You can keep him fresh. He could spot start at third if you needed him to, not often. At first, be a DH, split time at DH. He showed that he can do that when he was in Boston. I think that makes sense if they choose to go out of house. I don't know if that's what they're going to do. It's either that, in my opinion, it's either doing something along those lines or they're going to stay in-house because they'll look at the numbers and they'll say, look, when we combine, and we don't like when they do this because we saw this recently when it comes to, he who should not be named and others that they've worked in with the DH spot saying, oh, well, if you combine both of these players' numbers, they equate to X player. So we're not going to pay X player. We can have it for this player and use money to go elsewhere. I understand that point to an extent, but I don't think that that's the way that you could really go about it. But it might be what they choose to do in the end if they don't want to sign someone like a Justin Turner. That's what I think, because when I look at Jorge Soler, I think he's going to want to play every day or DH every day. Same thing with JD Martinez. Look, I think JD Martinez is a fit to an extent, but I think he's going to a contender. I think all these guys can go to contenders, but that's kind of where I'm at. I think Turner's the one that makes the most sense that could still fit the plan if the market bottoms out, which it might be. Everything's been so dead silent. Maybe the market's really dying out and they're forcing these guys to settle for 1 year deals as we get closer to camp. I don't know, but that's kind of where I am when it comes to the DH.
I tend to agree with you. And there's a lot of different stuff here on the DH from a lot of different folks from all over the chat since we got started. Chris Ferraro saying, cue the campaign, sign Soler, right? There's that. And then there's comments that just came in recently, that say, Chris saying this, which is a good point. Turner doesn't protect Pete enough. CP, I brought this up saying Ibby knows I'm team JT as well. Obviously, I'm team JT. Terry Collins, who we had on last week, said he wants a spot on that team. And he follows it up by saying to Chris, his power is underrated. I will say that. Not Soler power, obviously, but still underrated. And I think All of those, I think, are good points. Ibby, look, when this offseason started, I thought Jorge Soler was the perfect kind of guy because he's not invisible with the glove the way JD Martinez is. Now, he's not a good outfielder. Jorge Soler is not a good outfielder, but he can play some in the outfield, in left or right. You can put him out there. You probably have to replace him late and close, but he can be out there. Whereas JD Martinez, he's your DH, period, full stop, end of story. He's only
no
DHing.
Flexibility, right.
No flexibility. You're basically back to, and I'm not comparing them as players. He's had a much better career, but you're back to the Vogelback position of he's your DH or he doesn't play. He's DHing only. He doesn't have a glove, period. So I always like Soler better because I like flexibility, especially when you're a team that is not one player away. Now, if you're a team that's one player away and you need a bopper, you bring in JD Martinez, you let him DH every day. Who cares? You're trying to win a World Series. If you're the Mets and you're in evaluation mode, you can move things around a little bit more. And a guy like Soler gives you some of that flexibility because he's not useless in the field. He's not good, but he has a glove and he can go out there and he could play for 7 innings or he could play a full 9 innings in a game that you're running away with. Fine. I think he's a better fit for the Mets to protect Pete because Soler is a 30 to 40 home run guy, legitimately. And I think the Mets need a 30 to 40 home run guy in their lineup. I've said before, you look at Alvarez. I'm going to sign up Alvarez for 25 home runs. I think he can be more than that, but he's a second-year player, so I'm going to be conservative with that approach. I'm going to say 25 because he did it as a rookie. I think he'll get more, but let's just sign him up for 25. I think you could sign up Nimmo for slightly less. Now, I think Nimmo might be slightly more, but I think Nimmo's like a 22 home run guy. Let's say Lindor, 25. I know he hit 31, right, last year?
Right.
I know he's had seasons where he's hit more than that, but I think Lindor is probably a 25 homer guy. Then you have Alonso, who is a 40 home run guy. I say that because he's done it every year that wasn't shortened by COVID. I'd like another guy with 30 home run pop, 30 plus. So from that perspective, nobody fits better than Jorge Soler of the available and realistic options. But to the point that you just made, Justin Turner on a shorter term deal fits what the Mets are trying to do better. Justin Turner may not be, I know he's had years in the past where he's hit 30, 35, 37 home runs. I don't think Justin Turner's that guy anymore, and that's okay because I think he can help you win in other ways. I think Justin Turner knows how to clutch up. I think Justin Turner's an RBI guy. I think he'll be a doubles machine. So I think Turner helps. But I do think, to your point and what some of the people are saying in the chat, yeah, I think if you're just putting puzzle pieces out, Soler fits a bit better. But you can make the case for a protection of Pete standpoint. But you can also make the case, Ibby, that Justin Turner fits better because he gives you some assurances for Beatty, for Vientos, for McNeil. He allows you to back up Pete at first base with somebody else. And I think that's the problem with Soler, is that if you bring in Soler, and it's through no fault of his own because his game is his game and his position is his position. But if you bring in Soler, I guarantee you all, Brett Beatty is your starting third baseman. Period. End of story. Vientos will not beat him for the job. And Vientos is probably in AAA. Soler's going to be your most of the time DH, sometimes outfielder. Beatty's going to be playing third base every day. Joey Wendell's going to be your backup. I think that's gross. Beatty, I think, needs to prove it more. Again, just being fair. I think he earned it heading into last year, and I think he fumbled the bag. So I'm not going to be upset if they bring in Soler. I think he's a great fit, but I think that Justin Turner fits what this team is trying to do and what this team actually needs, because he does give you a little bit of a guard against whatever happens at third base. Not every day, like you said, but I just think he's a better fit. I do.
And what really needs to really be the the thing that's really hanging over all of this is I still think that teams that are closer than the Mets at the moment are still going to reign supreme in terms of even 1 year offers, which is why I think the Mets might think they're not in it because they might have to push in terms of years and money to get people, which is why I think they might settle for staying what they have with what they have in house. Because I do think in Arizona makes a lot of sense for JD Martinez. I do think going back to Boston or Toronto or even Arizona as well, I think makes sense for Turner. And obviously with Soler, same thing applies for those types of teams. So the closer teams are going to have the advantage in terms of the market bottoming out for 1 year, which is why the Mets might not choose to be in the market anymore if they have to go to 2 years. So there's a lot going on with everything, depending on what those better teams at the moment are going to choose to do that want offense. So it's going to be very interesting to watch. Based off of what I heard from Stearns, I feel like they're going to stay in-house, but I do not want this to come across as if I am going to say, no, I don't want Jorge Soler. No, I don't want Justin Turner. I would gladly welcome either one of them on my team to be the DH. I have championed for Justin Turner. I will gladly take Jorge Soler and his power on my team. I'm very hesitant in thinking that it's going to happen because of the things that I've seen and heard to this point.
Yeah, and we'll jump into the comments here. There's a lot of really good ones coming in from, a lot of different places. Carson saying, Soler has a redeeming arm in the outfield at least. Still sucks at it, but power covers sins. It's a fact. Yeah, I think when you have 1+ tool on defense and 1+ tool on offense, like that all in all makes a pretty good major league player. And he does. He has a good arm. So he can cover up for some of his warts with that when he has to play the outfield. And yeah, power does cover a lot of sins because if you make an error, you can also hit you can make an error that costs your team a run and then hit a grand slam. And he's that kind of a threat every time. So I think that's a good observation. TJ has a lot of good points here that kind of go back to some earlier comments.
Yeah.
I think this one fits what I was trying to say about Justin Turner. We just watched Tommy Pham bat fifth for the Diamondbacks in the World Series. This roster can win. Change of mindset is key. The September swoon in 22 where they lost the division hurt them mentally. That's all a good point, but I think the Tommy Pham batting fifth for the Diamondbacks in the World Series part is the part that I say, yeah, it can be Justin Turner. It doesn't have to be. I like the big bopper. Give me the guy who, you could pencil in for 30 and a high watermark might be 35 to 40. But you know what? I'm not going to sneeze at Justin Turner hitting 25 or 28.
Right.
When we just watched Tommy Pham do what he did for us and then the Diamondbacks. It's a good point. He then says, this is the year to see Beatty, and I think it's the biggest question. There's no one behind him. He needs every day at bats. You'll see within the first 200 at bats what you have in him. Then he followed up by saying, to me, when I was making my comment, don't agree at all. Beatty needs consistent at bats. It's sink or swim time. And then I think you just started this one, 200 at bats. You will know what he is. You see what the kids do. I'm tired of stopgaps, and I want to see these guys sink or swim. If it's good or bad results, we have to know. I agree with TJ.
Yeah.
I don't think TJ's mindset is wrong. And this is where I'm going to go back to what I was saying before as what John would do if John was in charge versus John reading what the Mets are doing.
Right.
I think John reading what the Mets are doing, TJ's spot on. I think that's what's going to happen. John, the GM, John putting his GM cap on, I think to me, Brett Beatty is not that good. I watched him for a year. I think of all the guys, Brett Beatty has had the most. You want to say Vientos hasn't had a fair shake? I can agree with that. You want to say Mauricio wasn't up long enough and now is hurt and we're not still 100% sure what he is? I agree with that. I think Alvarez has gotten a ton of playing time, obviously, as he should. I think we all know how good Alvarez could be. Ibby, I think Beatty's gotten a ton of playing time. And I'm not saying that Beatty does not deserve the ability to get better, but I think Beatty's not that good from what I've seen. And that's where I disagree with TJ. I think TJ's thought process is right in terms of what the Mets are going to do. I think he's right. But I saw enough last year to say, I don't know if this is a guy that can figure it out because there's a lot of problems with that swing.
There's a lot of things that go into a first-year player in New York, the pressure, the prospect status, being given the job. So there's obviously a lot of questions when it comes to Brett Beatty. I think that he is going to end up getting a majority of the looks. I think he's going to be given every opportunity to try and succeed. That's just the way I see it right now. Sometimes it takes people longer than others, and this isn't me trying to be a defendant or like a Beatty truther in that sense. Sometimes it takes a player to leave a spot in order to succeed. Maybe Brett Beatty is a very good baseball player, but maybe he can't do it in New York. And that's not me saying, oh, you got to be of a certain caliber to be a New Yorker. It's like, no, it's not that. I hate that narrative. Sometimes it gets into players' heads and they think that they can't handle it and they overcompensate. They overthink they can't do it. They can't make adjustments. The game's too fast. And I forgot who said it, but somebody had mentioned how they didn't like how Beatty had mentioned that the game was very fast for him. I think that's a normal thing to say.
Yeah, I don't. To be fair, I don't think that's. I think that's a young player being honest, and you see it all the time in every sport. I've even used the analogy outside of sports for other stuff that I do. I tell people all the time, sometimes you have to wait and let the game slow down for you. I think that's true in every sport. Anything. I think it's true in every walk of life, every
job,
every pursuit, every job. Yeah, like my job is crazy and hectic, and there's a million things flying at you at once because it's live event and it's real and there's no rope and there's no net. But then eventually you get to a point with reps where you can start eliminating factors that make it seem like there's a million things happening at once and break it down to one or two, and now you're in a manageable place. So I think saying that you don't like that, I think is unfair of the player. I do.
Yeah, I just think that sometimes you need a little bit of and look, I know things are expected right away in New York. I know everyone sees prospects, and we'll talk prospects in a moment. Everyone sees prospects and they see they're ranked a certain way and they go by these numbers and they live and die by them and they expect them to have the same results as other great players. Oh, this guy over in Houston was this ranked and he's doing this and he's a star. And this guy in St. Louis is doing this and he's a star. Why isn't our guy like this? And then there's a lot more to it than that. I think that, again, I think Beatty's going to get the looks. To TJ's point, I do think he's going to get a handful of at-bats before anything is truly decided. Is it going to be a true platoon with the Vientos? Is Vientos going to be playing the field? We'll see how all of that pans out when it comes to DH and things of that nature and how they go about setting the lineup. But, I do think that Brett Beatty is going to get, whether people like it or not, I do think Brett Beatty is going to get a fair share of the rope this year. And what he chooses to do with that rope, whether it's to take advantage or if it's to hang himself, either way, I think he's going to be given the opportunity to try and succeed. I do.
Listen, that's a really good way to put it. And again, I don't want to beat a dead horse on this, but I'm resigned to the fact that that's what the Mets are going to do. And look, Beatty is in the best position possible with trying to prove his worth. The Mauricio injury for Beatty was huge because I think, and I've said it on this show, of all the prospects that we have seen, I don't count Acuna and Jet Williams and Gilbert because they haven't been up here yet. The prospects that we have seen, I think Mauricio has the highest ceiling of anybody not named Alvarez. I think Alvarez can be an absolute stud. I think Mauricio is the next best guy from what we've seen. I think he's athletic. I think he brings a lot to the table. He hits the ball a ton. So I thought if a fair competition was set out between Mauricio, Vientos, and Beatty, that Mauricio would win the job. Now, some people told me that was crazy because he's not a good defender. Well, again, I don't like Vientos as a third baseman. I don't think he's a major league player at that position. And Beatty's not a great defender either. So I think that when push came to shove, Mauricio would win that job. Now I think it's a rigged game. I think that Vientos, especially, Ibby, if they do not acquire a DH, Vientos is going to be the DH and Beatty is going to be the third baseman. Or Vientos and Stewart are going to DH. Yeah. And, and then they'll also mix in other people. I'm not saying Vientos will probably play some third. He'll probably play a little bit of first. They'll DH Pete sometimes. They'll DH Lindor. They'll put Joey Wendell at shortstop. They will be a very rotational team. And I think that's good. I think that's how a lot of teams succeed. But I think the quote unquote everyday third baseman will be Beatty to start the season. And I think the everyday DH will be Vientos. So he's going to have his opportunity. And that puts him in a great spot. But the long and short of it for me is this. Darren says, sign someone to protect Pete in his walk year, which I already talked about. For me, I said it. That was the most important thing outside of pitching for the Mets. And so that's why I'm not okay with Beatty and Vientos. If the Mets had, man, I don't know. I'm trying to think of another kind of player. Like, I love Lindor. I'm not trying to shortchange Lindor at all. But I don't know. Who's a shortstop with more pop? Locked in, guaranteed more pop. Seager, maybe? I don't know.
I mean, to a lesser extent as an overall player, Willie Adames.
Yeah, like I'm just trying to think.
Power.
Yeah, I'm trying to swap out a player. Like, I'm not trying to add a player to the Mets team because that muddies the waters of what we're talking about here. Because then if you're adding a player, then I would just add Soler or Justin Turner, whatever. I'm trying to change a player that we already have, even though I love one, right? Like, so if the Mets had, instead of Marte, if the Mets had an outfielder that profiled to hit 35 home runs, I don't care who it is, just someone. I can't think of whatever. A player that hits 35 home runs, then I would say, yeah, okay, give Beatty 200 at-bats. Give him 250 at-bats. Let's see.
Yeah. No, I get
Vientos,
I get.
The thing is that the Mets don't have that player on the roster. The Mets don't have an outfielder. And I'm picking corner outfielder because, let's face it, a lot of teams do. Corner outfielders that hit 30 home runs are not exactly, unicorns. You can get a not so good player that plays in the corner outfield that can hit 30. So if the Mets had that kind of player on the roster, I'd be more inclined to give Beatty the chance. If the Mets had a lesser shortstop than Lindor, but like you said, a Willie Adames, somebody with more power, and that player can hit fourth or fifth behind Alonso, well, then I say, okay, you don't necessarily need. You could give the reps to Beatty. You could give the reps to Vientos. But the Mets don't have that player on the roster. And that's kind of what changes it for me. And then this point from CP saying the only person in-house that can fully protect Pete is Alvarez, and it's not happening in year 2. I think it could happen to Alvarez moving forward, but I'd also, the same way I don't want to give these opportunities carte blanche to people, I don't want to give it to Alvarez right off the gate. I don't want to put him in the 5th spot and make him have to protect Pete. I don't think that's fair.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. And then just look at the comments real quick. I'm seeing TJ bringing one up here saying how, why is Alvarez not a 35 home run guy? He blasted homers in the minors and will have more flexibility this year. Look, I think we both agree that, Alvarez can be that type of player. I think we're just trying to look at it more so in the lens of year 2, not saying sophomore slump, but there are growing pains. We saw it in the second half. So I think it might be a little bit safer at the moment to assume that he could reach what he was again, maybe even a little bit lesser if you want to be on the safer side as he continues to adjust. But as we've said multiple times on the show before, as he's been longer in certain stops, the longer he's been in certain stops, the more he's accustomed himself to what was going on, and he thrived. So for all I'm saying all of this as a precaution, but maybe year 2 he does take it to yet another level. It's definitely possible. I think we were just putting that more so on the safe side, if you will, as opposed to just assuming that he's going to be, a 30+ home run hitter, consistently moving forward.
Exactly. Look, I think he can be a guy that hits 30 home runs plus. I think he's obviously shown that, TJ. I don't want to take it away from him. I'm just trying to be realistic and conservative based on what these players have done in their careers. Look, Lindor had a season. Didn't Lindor hit 35 or 38 home runs one year? Something like that.
Might have been 18 or 19. Might have been the juice ball, but I don't know. Yeah,
it was mid to high 30s. It was 35 plus.
Definitely did, yeah.
But he did it once, and he has never really been that player again. And that's okay. Lindor's terrific. So he hit 35 or 37 one year, and he hit 31 last year. I'm not saying Lindor can't hit 30, but odds are he's going to hit more like 25 or 28, which is still terrific. But when you look at some of these other guys, again, I'm just going on what they've done. Pete, every year he wakes up, he hits at least 40. The only time he didn't do that was in a COVID-shortened season. Otherwise, he'd have the most home runs ever for anybody in their first 5 years in Major League Baseball. Yeah. A good thank you guys for helping out here. TJ saying Adames, Tone saying Pop, Seager, maybe Bichette. When I was bringing up corner outfielders, Mets vent saying Anthony Santander. That's the kind of players I'm talking about. Like, if the Mets had one of those players on their roster instead of the people that they have, then I would be like, yeah, throw these guys out there. Absolutely. Thank you, Tone, for catching that. Juice ball, Lindor hit 38. Thank you.
38, yeah.
That's what I thought he did, but I wasn't 100% sure. Ibby, look, we're over an hour. We can keep talking about this. We can run this down. But I think we should talk about some of the other stuff. I know you wanted to talk about, where the Mets prospects are. Mm-hmm. The Mets make a ton of signings in the international market, which I think are always good. The Wilpon Mets, one of the biggest things you could say about the Wilpon Mets is that they did not go into the international market enough. They didn't do it when players with high upside potential became available for potential below market value. I'm going to use the great example of Cespedes going to the Oakland A's of all places, on what was a below market value deal for a person of his caliber. And, we're going to use obviously the high end aspect of it, of, the Mets obviously being willing to go out there and, dabble with Yamamoto, where the Wilpon Mets were terrified of, anybody who was going to make a lot of money that didn't play in the major leagues. The Mets damn near got Yamamoto, and the Mets made a great offer and got Senga, and look how good that has been. So, whether it's in the amateur market, like it has been with these guys, or whether it's the more ready-made player for the major leagues, like some of the ones I just mentioned, it was brutal that the Wilpon Mets never really played in that way. And I'm so happy to see the Cohen Mets, live in that landscape. But we can talk about those guys. Nobody really knows a lot about those guys. But Baseball Prospectus and all the ones that rank the current top 100, they have a lot to say about the Mets farm system. So I think we should talk about that a little bit.
Absolutely. And I'm excited to show another creation of mine as I continue to get better and better, at least in my opinion. Maybe John doesn't like it, but maybe he does. He hasn't seen the video just yet, but the Baseball Prospectus top 101 came out. 5 of our New York Mets were in it. Some guys that we've been talking about that might make a difference this year for the team and over the next handful of years. Hopefully, if they pan out, and I'm sure Carson's going to have plenty to say within the comments, especially where some of these guys are ranked. But let's take a look at the video real quick. Oh, yeah. Looks pretty cool.
I love it. That's great. That's a great job out of you.
I think it was pretty sharp. Yeah,
it looks terrific. Keith with a great point. Where's DeMayo for this? We'll have DeMayo on soon, probably talking about this once I think some of the other lists come out, and we can really kind of dive in, because I think what Joe DeMayo does so well is, he's so in touch with the Mets prospects specifically that he could take the amalgamation of Baseball Prospectus and Baseball America and all these places, and then you get his view on where he would rank those guys, or his top 5 in the Mets organization and that stuff. But Ibby, a lot of people saying great graphic. I do agree. I think, I don't claim to be an expert on any minor league player. So none of these guys, obviously I've heard of them. Obviously I'm a Mets fan. I'm in touch, but I'm not Joe DeMayo. I'm not anybody who does this for Baseball Prospectus. At the same time, I am not a hater of Jet Williams the way that people like Carson are. I am surprised, though, to see Jet Williams as the top prospect in the organization, according to that list. I am surprised to see him ranked over Gilbert, and I'm a little surprised to see him ranked over Luis Angel Acuna, who I think is on the surface, the more toolsy player. He's got the pedigree because his whole family plays professional baseball in a stunning turn of events. They're just a wildly athletic family that have high levels of success playing Major League Baseball. And he's super fast and he's a great defender. I would just expect those two guys to be higher than Jet Williams. So I don't know really what to make of that. I'm not saying it's a good or bad thing. I'm just, from my perspective, I was shocked to see Jet Williams be the highest of all the Mets prospects.
Well, the interesting thing to me when it comes to Jet Williams is, you've seen people, and obviously Joe was one of the first ones that had him ranked when he put out his rankings a while back. Jet Williams was his number 1 within the system, and this was before even the Gilbert trade happened and bringing in, and obviously the rise of Scott and things like that. But he had Williams as his one, which was a question to many because he was one of the few within that space that had him there. So what's going to be so interesting to me as a fan who reads all of this and takes it all in and trusts the people that I speak with when it comes to this stuff is, I hear everything that Carson says. I think he has points when he says his things. I think Joe has his points. I think others within the industry have their points as well. I know Carson likes to hit on the fact that he's small. Others within the industry think that height could become an issue in terms of how well he can do. I know Carson yesterday was talking about how he attacks certain pitches within the zone, and can he do that with major league pitching? Is he going to be able to pull the ball to the extent that he had been doing in the minor leagues? There's so many questions, which is why I'm so interested to see whose thought process is going to win out here. We all want these guys to pan out. They're not all going to pan out. Okay. We hope that they do, but odds are they're not going to. I read a great article today on The Athletic by Will Salmon. As always, two-time guest of the show, always puts out fantastic work. He talked about what the industry outlook on the Mets minors is.
We will probably have Will Salmon on again before the season starts, by the way. We don't have a date yet, but also have talked to Will Salmon about coming back on before he gets too busy with going down to spring training and things like that. But we're going to try to get him on like right before the season kind of preview. So keep your eyes out for that.
Love it. Will's the best. Will's the man. But yeah,
best when it comes to for the Mets, best on the beat, Will Salmon.
Hands down. But now I lost my point. God damn
I'm sorry.
John.
I did that. That was my bad. I just wanted to make sure I was locking people in. You know what I mean?
No, I understand.
You got to give the people what they want. Tease them a little bit.
Yeah, I'll eventually find the point.
I will say this from Carson. I brought it up before. He has mid 2 shit records, noodle next Wheeler for those 5 guys.
Hey,
I'll
Carson,
him up again.
did you see the SNY post today? Even though they said he was in a cage, he wasn't in the cage. But Luis Acuna, he was pulling the ball. Just saying, you're saying he was never pulling the ball. He was pulling the ball. I don't know if you made a comment on that, but crack of the bat, it was pulled. Just saying.
Okay, I will say this though. Okay, I played baseball up until I was in high school and was not good enough to go pro, and I play softball now, so I'm not like fucking Tom Amansky hitting with the pros. When I watched that video from SNY, I thought 2 things. You already brought up one. He wasn't in a cage. Maybe somebody should understand 1, how to dress Martino, 2, how to set up a shot, 3, how to know what a cage is and what a cage isn't. I thought it was pretty obvious what a batting cage looks like. I guess not. I guess if you're a network that covers mostly baseball, you don't have to know what a cage is. Fine. Listen, there was a news reporter, a journalist that asked Todd Bowles if he was doing anything special to get the Buccaneers prepared to play in the cold, frigid weather of Detroit when they play in a fucking dome. Detroit has played in a dome for like 55 fucking years, you morons. So anyway, those are 2 of the things I've noticed. But the other thing I noticed, and I brought up my lack of baseball prowess, as a professional, to say that it looked like he was overswinging a little bit. I thought I saw him kind of swinging out of his shoelaces, Acuna. I just want to say that. That's all I want to say, Ibby. I don't want to start a controversy over it.
Of course. I think Carson comes in. Acuna was pulling the ball, but the lower half is so shit. Beyond inconsistent makes me sick. Look, based off of the things that were said in that article with Sam, that's where I was going. When it comes to that article about the overall outlook of these players, when it came to Acuna, look, it didn't come across as if they thought he was going to be this all-world superstar. The comments from Stearns made it seem as though he views him as a jack-of-all-trades type that can play short, that can play second, that can play center, that brings value to a team. His speed obviously plays, but look, the more I look and the more I read, it seems as though Acuna might be a guy, if he sticks at the major league level, that comes across as a guy that might hit 10 to 15 home runs, and he's really dependent on stealing a shit ton of bags to really bring a true value to a team. And is that enough? I guess it's dependent on roster construction and what else is a part of said team, but I'm not sure what to think. And I think it's also telling that he was someone that came up and I should say came over as so highly regarded from Texas, comes into the system, but he comes here, kind of had a little of a down second half the moment he got here, whereas others, Jet continued to come through the system and play well. Drew came over, elbow was cleared up, and he ended up doing very well. They jump him, as does Clifford, in some rankings as well. So, things like that, and those players have profiles that might provide a little bit more in comparison to Acuna. So look, we'll see what happens with him. I think a lot of times people get very excited because of the last name. That happens a lot. Everyone was pumped up when we signed, Vladdy Guerrero, which is the brother of Vlad Jr., the son of the great Vladimir Guerrero. But let's be honest, based off of the reports, Vladdy Guerrero isn't that great in terms of the international free agency, and he's getting so much pub as he is because, number one, he took a badass picture with his father, and number two, of who his father and brother are. So there are things that we all have to not get too wrapped up in and lost in as we go through trying to understand players of the prospect nature, because like I said before, we want them all to pan out, but they're probably not going to.
Shout out to Vladimir Guerrero, by the way, for taking the George Foreman approach to naming your children and just naming them all after you. Like, I didn't know, like, I don't want to be a dick. Like, anything can be a name, right? You can name that's the rule. You can name your kids anything you want. You can name your kids essentially nothing and then let them change their name when they get to a certain age. And I'm not talking about people who are transitioning or anything like that. You could literally let your kids name themselves. There's nothing, but I didn't know that. I just would have assumed that Vladdy was just a nickname for Vlad. And I just like, he's for Vladimir. And he's like, now, you know what? Boom. We're just rattling them off. Vladimir Guerrero Jr. We got Vladdy Guerrero. I don't know if he has any daughters. Maybe it's Vladimira. I have no idea. I don't even know if that's a name. But you know what? Shout out to Vladimir Guerrero for just going, I'm going to fucking bring it. Yeah. I love me some me, and I'm going to name all my kids after me. Okay. Listen, I guess if you're a Hall of Famer, you could do that. Baseball Tone saying, the hate for Acuna is wild. Cohen dropped 20+ mil on the kid. He's the first up to play second base.
I don't doubt that.
Let's take the hate for Acuna and aim that towards Beatty instead.
Look, I'm not trying to hate. Yeah, I'm not trying to hate on Acuna. Like look, if it brings me someone to this lineup, which I've been saying that needs an identity and it provides a spark, it provides excitement. I've talked about excitement on this podcast or on this show in general for the last, who knows, like just how much I enjoy watching the likes of Cincinnati, Baltimore, Arizona, all the younger teams. And if a player like Acuna comes up and he acts as a lightning rod type that just comes up, is hitting the ball around the park, is running everywhere. Look, I want that to happen. And I agree with you. The money that was spent, he will be up at some point this year. And whether it's filling in at second base, playing center field, I do think he's going to be one of the first guys that we see come up. And hopefully he does swim as opposed to sink, like many think he might. But no, I'm not trying to hate on the guy that much. I'm just saying, how I'm reading things based off of people that know a lot more than I do in the space.
Yeah, and Tone, for me, I was being a little tongue-in-cheek. I just wanted to poke the bear a little bit. But I do think, because he was pulling the ball, but I did think he was overswinging a little bit. Yeah. Like, legitimately, it looked like he was swinging out of his shoes. So, I actually don't have any hate for him because I think somebody who is that versatile and that fast, to Ibby's point, you can be a contributing player, especially when you're young and the league doesn't have a book on you and you're super quick. You can be – there's a lot of ways that Acuna can be a valuable member of a winning team without necessarily even being a starting player. So I think he has some – he doesn't maybe have the highest upside potential in terms of a starter, but he might have the lowest ceiling, Ibby, because of the lowest floor, rather. I don't mean to say lowest ceiling. He might have the lowest floor because of what his skill set is, right? If he's bat to ball, defense first, speed guy, well, that guy can help you in a lot of ways, especially when he can play second, short, and center field. So, you can move that guy around and have a lot of versatility. Carlos Ortiz saying something, I don't know if this is true, but I believe him. Jose Cruz named all his kids Jose. I don't know if that's true, but you know what? Okay, I hope so. I want to believe it. I just want to believe it because that's fun. Mets Vent saying, so McNeil 2.0 with regards to Acuna. And I think as good as McNeil has shown at times, I think he's actually I think Acuna is a better prospect because, one, he is a prospect. And I think he has a part of his game that McNeil never had, which is speed. So, I think there's
a better athlete.
That's what I'm saying.
Athlete, yeah.
I think there's parts of Acuna's game that are McNeil-esque or reminiscent of McNeil, but I think it's unfair to both because I think they're different kinds of players. I think there is some overlap on the Venn diagram, but I think they're different players, and I think it's unfair to them. Mets Vent saying best case is Whit Merrifield. I guess
maybe. I mean, maybe.
Carlos Ortiz, 5 kids. 5 kids, all Jose, I guess, for Jose Cruz. That's hilarious. Ibby, here's the one thing that you can hang your hat on with regards to these players not all panning out. CP noting this list: Rodriguez, Jackson, Acuna, Williams, the list goes on. Unreal middle infield depth chart in the minors for the Mets. And I think that is the one thing you really want to look at if you're fans and if you're not really sure how to judge prospects, is that a lot of times guys who can play shortstop in college and guys who play shortstop when they're coming up are the most athletic players. They are the most versatile players. They find themselves playing center field in the majors or left field or moving to third base or second base or whatever. So when you look at this middle infield depth chart in the minors, which is from a minor league perspective, knowing that they could all not pan out, this is an impressive list of players for the Mets to have at pretty prominent positions, knowing that they can branch out and become third baseman, hell, first baseman if they get too big. If you could play shortstop, which most of these players have done at least part-time, that's a good list to have. And that's something you can hang your hat on. You got 5 or 6 legitimate shortstop prospects. You can move those guys around a lot. And maybe they don't pan out as, nobody's expecting them to become the next A-Rod, but they may become a very good second baseman, a very good left fielder, something like that.
And also, like, you list all those names, you see all of them. And again, it just continues the point when people are always like complaining. Like, I know people were complaining because, oh my God, we took another shortstop and a catcher in the international free agent draft where, these are kids, 16, 17 years old. And everyone's like, we're taking more catchers and shortstop. Look, any great player that is good enough to play at the next level to get to Major League Baseball. We've talked about this with Joe DeMayo. We've talked about this at length. You play up the middle, your catchers, your shortstops, your center fielders, your pitchers, those positions that you play. Look, you take all of these guys because it's the position that they play because they're the best player on those given teams, what have you. But you take these guys because, again, they're not all going to pan out. You could have 6 great shortstops. You're lucky if one pans out. Correct. You are lucky if one player pans out. And that's really what it comes down to. Don't focus on what positions. You always take talent. You work with it. You develop it. And you see what happens. Because, again, some of these guys are going to push forward and continue to be great and make it to the next level. And a lot of them are going to fizzle out and just not be there. It's simple as that.
Yeah, let's end this, Ibby, jumping into some comments if you got a few more minutes, and we'll kind of just put a bow on it this way. Yeah. Doug M. I don't know if you're still here, Doug, saying first time catching the live stream. Keep up the good work, fellas. So just thank you for that, Doug.
Thank you, Doug M.
On coming back. I think that's the Syracuse Mets logo right there. So maybe an upstate New Yorker or Western New Yorker shouting out those Syracuse Mets. But thank you for the well wishes.
Thank you.
Here's a couple comments from earlier on, Ibby, that I think kind of speak to the entire theme of this episode and the entire theme of this offseason. G Money Stacks says the quote I saw by
my favorite guy, G Money Stacks.
The quote I saw by Stearns, as Chris pointed out in True Mets Talk podcast, is that the Mets fans need patience in order to understand the philosophy and the vision. Having trust is key. I think that's just look. I don't say this as a slight to G Money, but that's obvious to us who already understand it. Right. And I think the unfortunate thing about the comment, and again, I'm not saying this is a slight to G Money if he's still here, because this comment was from a long time ago. But the unfortunate thing about this comment, Ibby, is that there are people who get it like G Money does. And I think Chris Ferraro is the person that he's commenting on here who also gets it. A lot of people get it in our chat. You and I get it. But I think the people who don't get it will never get it. So it's hard. Like we go out of our way to try to preach this on this show, on our Twitter, but like the people who don't get it just aren't going to get it. And that's the unfortunate thing about this comment from G Money, because I think it's spot on. But if you don't get it, you just, I think if you don't get it, it's willful ignorance and you're just refusing to. And at that point, what can you do? Yeah. Like, you want to tell people to be patient and trust the process. And they're like, but I don't understand why they didn't sign everybody. You're like, I just told you why. And I don't, or they're like, Stearns is asleep. Like I can't, you can't talk to that person. That person is just, you can't. And that brings me to these comments from Aunt Rivera. Can you explain this to Brandon Tierney, since he doesn't compute what Stearns is saying? He needs the info fumbled down for him. I think he meant dumbed down. It was probably a typo, but yeah, it's true. And then CP followed it up by saying Salicata is saying Stearns is sending mixed messages. It's unreal. I know Keith is here. I don't mean to dump on your boy Salicata. I know you guys are buddies.
I do.
But, you know what? I actually do. But out of respect for Keith, because
you tweet about it more than I do. So
I do.
At least I make fun of
me.
Sal. I make fun of Sal to through DMs. I'm not so much out in the open. But if there's one thing, because obviously we're going to finish up now. Shout out to everyone here. I see that Wardy's in here too. Thank you so much, Wardy. I love it when you stop into the chat. I know Wardy's got a Q&A tonight, so make sure you're tuned in for that. As for us, we are at 636 subs on the road to 700. Obviously, we got to get to 650 first. So there's 51 of you in here right now. If all 51 of you are subscribed to the channel, thank you so much. We appreciate you that much more. But if you haven't subscribed to the channel and this is your first time here, please hit that sub button. Like the video. We're here every Wednesday. We have a lot of fun. We're very interactive with the chat. We want more of you to listen to us, to find us, to spread the word about us, because again, small channel, doing our best to grow within the community. So 48 now are in here, some are dipping out as we're closing up, but again, 636. Could we find 14 more subs? Can we get to 650? It would be nice. I think it'd be kind of cool to get to 650. Maybe you have it, maybe you have. If you are sub, thank you so much. If you haven't, trust me when I tell you, we're going to bring a lot of good stuff to you moving forward throughout the off season, as well as the season when it starts. We have a lot of stuff in the makings. We have some news coming up shortly. It's all good things.
Yes,
make sure you are subbed to the channel. Yes.
We may. Okay. You know what? I'm going to tease it. We may.
Okay.
We may have some news next week. I'll just say that. We may have some news next week.
May have some news.
This is not the news, but if Wardy is still here, you don't have to answer in the chat, Wardy, but we also want to get you back on the show. We haven't had you on in quite some time.
Want Wardy
We'd
back
like to
on.
have you back
to get him on. Yes.
We will talk to you about it off air. So I'm not putting pressure on you. I'm just letting you know. You don't have to answer now.
Yeah.
We'll DM. We'll talk. But people want it. So I would love to collaborate with you. We would love to collaborate with you again.
Love it.
Ibby, I'm just going to ask you this. CP brought this up earlier. I think this is a good way, real quick, because it's a funny talking point, and I think we should talk about it on the way out. And here's the caveat, because a lot of people in the comments said both. I would take either. You have to pick one, and I think this is funny. CP saying, which one are you taking? Justin Turner, 280, 23 home runs, or Jorge Soler, 240 average with 33 home runs? You have to pick one. Contracts don't matter. Which one would you rather have for the Mets in 2024?
So basically, I think, so basically what you're saying is if the names weren't there, it's like a blind resume. Which one would you rather have, essentially? If you showed me that, obviously I see the names, but if you showed me that and I didn't see the names, odds are, knowing myself, I would probably choose the Soler numbers. I probably would. The 240, 33 home runs, I would probably end up choosing that. If I was put on the spot, I probably would. I'm a JT guy, but I would probably choose that.
Before I give you my answer, Wardy said, got yourself a date, handsome. Thank you. So that means that I guess he has agreed to come on the show. We'll figure out exactly when.
Yes,
and
love
it is all good. Listen, CP saying he wants Turner. He answering his own question, which I appreciate. Keith saying he wants Turner. Carson, answer is not going to surprise you. Soler, bombs. Next question. Chris Ferraro saying, give me someone. So he's going right there. Carlos Ortiz saying JT. Mets vent. Soler 10 times out of 10. Baseball tone, Soler behind Pete. We got enough guys that can hit 280. Darren Rivera, Soler. And this is why I brought it up right at the end of the show, because I knew people would just answer like in rapid succession. Charlie saying Turner. Ibby, I love Justin Turner. I want Justin Turner on the Mets. I think it would be a good story. I think he could still hit. We've talked about it. I talked about it with Terry Collins. You talked about it with Terry Collins. I think he's great. I think give me the 33 home runs guaranteed. 240 is not a bad batting average if you're going to hit 33 home runs. That doesn't even factor in RBI, to be fair, for either player. But if you're going to hit 240 in today's baseball and hit 30-plus home runs, I will take you hitting fifth behind a guy who's probably, and it's not out of school to say this, is going to hit 40 to 45.
Well,
you know what I'm saying?
Probably batting 240, 250.
Correct. So give me Lindor with his 25, 28. Give as your 3, 4, 5. Give me Lindor 20. I'll you know what? I'll say 28 for Lindor. Okay, because he's done that the last couple of years at least. Give me Lindor batting third with 28. Give me Pete batting fourth with 45, 42, and then give me Soler hitting 33. That's the shit. That's what I want. Keith, Soler will come to the Mets and hit 8 home runs. Keith, I love you for saying that because it's hilarious, but fuck, I don't stop. I really don't want that. I do not want that to happen. League average, batting average is 237, which we do not care about. That's true. 237 is league average. So if you got Soler hitting slightly above league average, giving you more than league average in terms of home runs, I will take that. Subway to Shea, are we going to do the 24-hour stream, fellas? I'm here for it. Maybe. We'll figure it out. We wouldn't all be streaming for 24 hours. We would do some kind of rotational, like telethon way to do it. But anyway, yeah, look, this has been a great chat, as it always is.
Love it.
And this time of year,
Fantastic.
We look for the chat. We really do look to you guys because, it's more interesting conversation. Like CP brought that up an hour ago, and I was like, I'm going to star this because I think it'll be a fun thing to talk about on the way out. So, you know what, guys, we may have some cool news to talk about next week. Mm-hmm. We will have some cool guests on in the next couple weeks. We'll get with Wardy separately, figure out when he can come on. I've got some feelers out to some old guests right now who I'm trying to get back on the show
as well. Yeah.
I think they would all be returning guests if I know who you're talking about. So some cool guests that we've had on before, but we haven't talked to in a while. And leading up to spring training, we like to get those guests on and get feelings from a lot of people. Like I said, we're trying to get Will Salmon on right before the season starts. TJ saying January Mets, till Mets do his part shows, build character. Yes, I agree. Building character since 1962. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for tuning in. Subscribe to the channel. Hit the thumbs up button on the way out. We are out of here. That is Ibby. I'm John. This is Till Mets Do Us Part, and we will see you guys next week. Peace.